Hey guys, tonight we drift into the stillness of America's deep past, when the land itself became the canvas of a vanished world. You walk beneath a pale wash of moonlight, cicadas buzzing in the darkness, and there, rising gently from the grass, are shadows that do not belong to trees. They are mounds, strange, sloping shoulders of earth, some small and rounded, others wide and flat-topped like steps leading into the sky. They sit in silence, but they hum with something older than memory. You probably won't survive if you try to run straight up one of these in the dark. Ankles have their limits, but you feel the pull anyway, like these shapes are whispering. Climb and see. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time of night it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You place a hand on the mound slope. It is cool, damp with dew, and surprisingly firm. This is no casual heap of dirt. This is layered soil carried basket by basket, packed down by countless hands thousands of years ago. In the quiet, you imagine the builders, small groups of men and women working with woven containers, moving earth from riverbanks, humming songs that have vanished into time. The mainstream historical fact is clear. The first of these mounds in North America were built around 3,000 years ago, during the Archaic and later Adena cultures, making them older than many medieval castles. You're literally standing on history that predates Rome's empire by centuries. The night feels thick with questions. Who told them to shape these hills? Were they shrines, graves, or something else entirely? Historians still argue whether the earliest mounds were meant purely for burials or if they carried astronomical meaning, aligning with stars and solstices. You tilt your head back and notice the constellations, sharp in the sky. Maybe the mounds once acted as grounded constellations, stars mirrored in soil. A quirky tidbit slides into mind. Some 19th century settlers speculated these mounds weren't human at all, but were built by a lost race of giants or even the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Spoiler, archaeology says otherwise, but you can almost forgive the fantasy. At night, under the moon, anything feels possible. You walk closer, circling a smaller mound. The grass rustles around your feet, and you imagine the animals that might have wandered these earthworks long after their builders faded. Deer grazing at dawn, foxes burrowing at the edges, perhaps one unlucky groundhog attempting to claim ancient sacred real estate as his personal penthouse. You chuckle softly. Nature is never sentimental. Farther along, a line of low mounds stretches like a procession. Each one is a quiet note in an ancient song. Archaeologists tell us that the Adena people, among the first mound builders, often placed burials within, layered with log tombs and covered with earth. Yet, as you move your hand across the surface, you sense the purpose was not simply about death. These places feel communal, as if the act of building itself was ceremony. Imagine neighbors gathering, children helping in small ways, food shared at dusk after long hours of work. The mound is both a structure and an event, a memory pressed into clay. A breeze lifts, carrying the faint scent of damp soil. You pause and glance back. The mound looms larger now, the moon sketching silver shadows across its curve. If you squint, it almost looks alive, like a sleeping giant under a blanket of grass. There's your second light joke. Don't worry, if it does wake up, just offer it a midnight snack, and maybe it'll roll back over. The eerie thing is how quiet these places are. You expect noise, crickets, a distant owl, but for a moment, all sound falls away. The earth seems to hold its breath. You realize the builders must have felt this too, the sense of standing on something both natural and unnatural, a bridge between the ordinary and the sacred. Still, the debates linger. Were these first mounds simple, practical expressions of respect for the dead, or were they early attempts at cosmic architecture, placing humans in alignment with forces bigger than themselves? Archaeology can dig, measure, carbon date, but even now the answers aren't certain. Historians still argue whether the earliest mound-building societies saw themselves as farmers anchoring communities or as spiritual engineers raising landscapes of meaning. The truth, like the soil layers, is probably a mix of both. You crouch down and press your palm to the ground again. It's strange knowing you are touching the past with such immediacy. No glass case, no museum rope, just earth shaped by hands like yours, long vanished. You whisper to yourself, they were here, and perhaps in a way, they still are. Above, a thin cloud drifts across the moon, and shadows shift across the mound. The hill seems to breathe. You smile faintly. Third light joke. If it suddenly rolls over and asks you for the Wi-Fi password, you're out of luck, but you'd have one unforgettable bedtime story to tell. The night moves on, and so do you, your footsteps carrying you deeper among these earthworks. Ahead, larger shapes rise. They beckon, more complex, more deliberate, whispering that the story of the mound builders is only beginning. You follow the curve of the earth as the trail bends, and the mounds begin to thin out into rolling shapes that almost blend with the natural hills. Yet you sense the difference. These were not accidents of wind and rain. They are marks of intention, modest beginnings of a tradition that would later bloom into vast landscapes of ritual earthworks. The first builders appear to you not as a grand civilization with cities and kings, but as small, mobile groups of hunter-gatherers pressing into the forests and river valleys of what we now call the Ohio River region. They live lightly on the land, moving with the seasons, collecting wild plants, hunting deer, and fishing in the broad rivers. And yet, somewhere along the way, they decide that memory deserves permanence. They begin to build. The mainstream fact is simple but profound. Some of the earliest burial mounds in North America date back to around 1600 BCE, made by people we now label with cultural names like Adena or archaic. These first efforts are modest, just low, rounded mounds covering a single burial or two, but they are the seeds of something larger. You picture them at work. They carry soil in woven baskets, perhaps laughing, perhaps singing, perhaps grim in concentration. It's hard to know. No one writes down their reasons. No neat stone inscription says, "We did this because." Historians still argue whether these early mounds were intended strictly as graves or whether they already carried symbolic power, points of connection between living families and ancestral spirits. At night, it's easy to imagine the glow of fires near these fresh mounds, the way smoke would curl into the stars. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind. In the 19th century, some amateur antiquarians suggested that the earliest mounds might have been natural anthills, magnified by centuries of giant insects. Thankfully, professional archaeology quickly ruled that out. unless those ants were 7 feet tall and had a remarkable work ethic. You step carefully through grass wet with dew. The air is cool, filled with the scent of cedar and river mud. You imagine a family huddled nearby, cooking fish wrapped in leaves, the mound rising behind them as silent testimony. A child asks why they built it, and the elder answers, perhaps, "So they will not be forgotten." The silence of these spaces can be unnerving. You glance back and notice how the moonlight seems to pool at the base of the mound, as though drawn there. Maybe it's only the slope of the earth. Or maybe, as some modern enthusiasts like to believe, the builders understood subtle flows of energy in the land. Historians still argue whether these mounds might have been part of a broader tradition of sacred geography, shaped not only by spiritual beliefs, but by natural features like rivers, hills, and even celestial events. You pause and listen. Somewhere far off, an owl calls. The moment feels timeless. And then, breaking the solemnity, you think, imagine being the first guy who suggested, "Hey everyone, let's carry dirt for days just to make a hill." That must have been one persuasive ancestor. You chuckle softly, the sound drifting into the night. The path winds along a ridge, where smaller mounds dot the ground like quiet punctuation marks in a sentence you haven't yet learned to read. Archaeologists say some of these may have begun as simple coverings for honored individuals, but over generations they grew larger as new burials were added, layer by layer. What began as a family tradition expanded into communal heritage. You bend down, press your hand against the soil, and imagine the layers: logs, clay, earth, stacked carefully in memory of someone important. The moon slips behind a cloud, and the scene dims. For a heartbeat, you stand in near darkness, and the mounds blur into shadows. You wonder whether these builders also knew this feeling, the way earthwork and night conspire to create mystery. Maybe they used that very sensation as part of ritual. You can almost hear a drum, low and steady, carrying across the valley. And then, like a whisper of humor, another thought intrudes. If Netflix had existed, maybe these communities would have skipped mound building for late-night binge sessions. But no, this was their drama, their reality show, played out on the land itself. When the moonlight returns, you see the mounds anew, edges sharp again. They are not large. You could walk up one in a minute. But their very existence is astonishing. Here before great temples, before massive cities, before Cahokia's plazas, people still reached for something beyond the ordinary. They did it with what they had: hands, baskets, patience. The trail slopes downward, leading you toward a wider clearing. More mounds wait ahead, larger, more structured, hinting at circles and alignments that are not yet fully clear. The quiet voice of the earth says, "The story is growing, and soon the Adina will make their presence known." You step into a clearing where the grass thins, and the ground opens wide in a circle that feels deliberate, as though the earth itself was persuaded to take shape. Low ridges stretch around you, curving into arcs that nearly meet. You pause in the center, and the night air seems to grow heavier, as if the past presses down here more than anywhere else. These are the circles of the Adina, builders of mounds, yes, but also designers of sacred earthworks, whose purpose still teases the imagination. The Adina culture flourished roughly from 1000 to 200 BCE in the Ohio Valley. That's the widely accepted historical fact. They are recognized as among the earliest mound-building societies with distinctive circular and conical earthworks. Their circles could be ditches, embankments, or arrangements of mounds, often used in combination with burial sites. Archaeologists believe these places were ceremonial centers, blending ritual, burial, and perhaps even gatherings for storytelling or feasting. You walk slowly along the arc of the earthwork. The ridge is not high, but in the moonlight it feels monumental. You picture families filing through an entrance cut into the circle, carrying baskets of offerings. The flicker of firelight would have illuminated painted faces, rattles shaking, voices chanting. A mound may rise at the center, covering a tomb or an altar. You stand where the living once met the departed, where the boundary between daily life and sacred time blurred. And yet, even here, nothing is certain. Historians still argue whether Adena circles were primarily burial enclosures, astronomical observatories, or performance spaces for ritual drama. The alignments with solstices are tantalizing, but not always exact. The presence of ceremonial objects suggests meaning beyond graves, but meaning slips away when all you have is earth and silence. You crouch and scoop a handful of soil, letting it sift through your fingers. Somewhere beneath may lie logs that once formed tombs, or carved pipes, or ornaments of copper hammered thin by Adena artisans. A quirky tidbit. One Adena burial contained a human skeleton over 7 feet tall, sparking old legends about a race of giants buried in the mounds. Modern anthropology notes that genetic variation and nutritional factors occasionally produced tall individuals. But that didn't stop 19th century newspapers from running with the idea that North America once housed a lost tribe of towering people. You glance around the circle and chuckle nervously. If a giant steps out tonight, you'll let them take the first marshmallow at the campfire. You walk further inside, listening to the soft scrape of your shoes in the grass. The circle feels like an open-air temple. You imagine the beat of a drum echoing from the ridges, voices layered in harmony, smoke curling into the night sky. For the Adena, life was not just survival, it was ritual. And ritual left its mark in soil. A shadow crosses the moon, and you look up. A bird? A cloud? Hard to say. You wonder if the Adena, too, read omens in the night sky while standing here. Perhaps they believed that their circles were mirrors of the heavens, patterns etched on earth to reflect the stars. Archaeologists have found that some circles line up with lunar cycles or solstice points, though the exact precision is debated. Still, the idea of farmers and hunters watching the heavens, then carving those rhythms into earth, feels profoundly human. You pause and smile. Imagine the planning meeting. So, folks, instead of just planting corn, we're going to move thousands of baskets of soil into a perfect circle. That's one way to keep your neighbors busy for a season. Humor aside, the act itself must have been deeply bonding. Communities who built together likely felt ownership, pride, and connection to both earth and sky. The wind stirs, brushing cool against your face. You glance at the ridge, the curve sweeping around like an embrace. The circle is incomplete, part of it eroded by centuries of rain and farming, but still it holds its shape. Still, it whispers. You can almost hear voices layered in the grass, echoes of speeches, laughter, and mourning. A firefly blinks once, twice, and then fades into the dark. You step toward the center where the ground rises slightly. The Adena often buried leaders or sacred objects here. You picture a figure wrapped in textiles, ornaments of mica glittering faintly, copper beads stitched onto clothing. They were laid down carefully, the mound built slowly above them, the community watching as earth covered the body. For the Adena, death was not an end, but a transformation, and the circle was the stage for that passage. Still, the questions remain. Historians still argue whether Adena circles were primarily communal theaters of life and death, or whether their geometry carried cosmic instructions passed down from ancestors. The truth may be both, or neither. The earth itself holds the answer, and the earth isn't talking. You breathe deeply and step back, the circle stretching wide around you. The night seems to hum with ancient energy, neither hostile nor friendly, simply present. And you think, with a small smile, if the Adena had invented popcorn, these ceremonies would have had quite the concession stand. The trail bends outward again, carrying you from the circle toward rivers and valleys where new builders will rise. Ahead, you sense a shift. The Adena are only the beginning. Soon, the Hopewell will extend the horizon, weaving circles into something vast and interconnected. You leave the Adena circles behind, the arcs fading into the shadows of trees. The air feels heavier, as though the forest itself knows you are walking toward something larger, more ambitious, more intricate. The trail widens, and soon you step into a vast plain, where earthworks no longer stand as isolated mounds, but stretch across the horizon in deliberate patterns. This is the world of the Hopewell, master planners, traders, and dreamers who wove the land into geometry. The Hopewell culture thrived roughly from 200 BCE to 500 CE, spreading across much of the eastern United States. That's the mainstream historical fact. They didn't build cities in the way the Mississippians later would, but they constructed enormous geometric enclosures, squares, circles, and octagons that still baffle and inspire. Some are so large you could fit dozens of football fields inside. You wander into one now, the ridge beneath your feet barely rising a few feet, but stretching endlessly outward in perfect symmetry. The moonlight makes the outlines ghostly, the embankments barely visible against the grass. You imagine what it must have looked like when new. Soil freshly packed, surfaces smooth, the entire form sharp against the landscape. People gathering by the hundreds, maybe thousands, their fires glowing at the edges, their voices carrying across the open field. Historians still argue whether these vast enclosures were ceremonial centers, astronomical observatories, or both. The alignments with lunar cycles are compelling. At Newark, Ohio, for example, an octagon and circle earthwork align precisely with an 18.6-year lunar cycle. You tilt your head back and consider the moon above. Did Hopewell astronomers track it carefully, then carve its rhythm into the earth? The possibility makes you feel both small and awed. A quirky tidbit. When 19th-century surveyors first mapped the Newark earthworks, some insisted they were too precise to have been made by primitive hands. A few even suggested wandering Europeans or Atlanteans had done the job. The irony? Modern laser surveys prove the Hopewell's geometry is astonishingly accurate, even without steel tools, GPS, or drafting software. Take that, Atlantis. You walk the edge of a square enclosure, your steps crunching softly in the grass. The geometry is so vast you can't hold it all in view at once. That's part of the mystery. These shapes were meant to be experienced on the ground, walked, lived, embodied. Imagine walking by torchlight, following the line of the earthwork for hours, feeling both lost and guided. Perhaps the act itself was ritual. To walk the square, the circle, the octagon, was to step into sacred order. In the distance, you sense movement. The shimmer of trade goods flashes in your imagination. Copper from the Great Lakes, obsidian from the Rockies, shells from the Gulf Coast, mica from the Appalachians. All these have been found in Hopewell mounds. They weren't isolated farmers. They were connected to a continent. You picture caravans moving along rivers, carrying precious items wrapped in bark or skin, offerings for ceremonies that filled these vast enclosures with meaning. And yet, the questions remain. Historians still argue whether the Hopewell were a single unified culture or a loose network of allied peoples who shared ideas but maintained distinct communities. Were these earthworks political centers, spiritual theaters, or both? The answers, like the mounds themselves, are vast and incomplete. You pause, letting the cool air settle around you. The sky feels immense, the stars scattered like bright shells across dark velvet. For a moment, the embankment beneath your feet seems to rise higher, as if the earth itself leans closer to listen. Then, you think, almost laughing, if the Hopewell had invented golf, this place would have been the most intimidating mini-golf course in history. Imagine trying to put through a lunar-aligned octagon. The humor fades into awe again. These people carved meaning into the land on a scale so large that only from the air, something they could never achieve, can we truly see it. Did they sense that? Did they know they were creating shapes only the gods could look down upon? Or did they simply trust that the earth and sky were already in conversation, and their role was to mirror that dialogue in soil? You walk further, the embankments stretching on like ancient walls of memory. The ground here feels alive with footsteps, though no one else is near. You imagine gatherings where pipes carved from stone were smoked in ritual, where feasts filled with deer meat and maize were shared, where chants and dances rose into the night. The geometry surrounds you, and you feel yourself becoming part of it, just another figure in the great pattern. The Hopewell fade from history centuries before. Europeans arrive, but here, under the moon, they are still present. Ahead, the path dips into shadow, leading you toward places where trade goods glimmer and strange artifacts whisper of connections across the continent. The Hopewell horizon stretches further than you first thought, and you are about to step into its gleaming mysteries. The trail carries you deeper into the Hopewell horizon, where the air seems thick with the scent of distant rivers and the promise of far-off lands. You pause at the base of another mound, but this one hums differently. It isn't just soil and memory, but a warehouse of treasures carried across thousands of miles. Archaeologists have uncovered in Hopewell sites objects that could never have come from local ground. That's the mainstream historical fact. Copper sheets from the Great Lakes, mica cut into delicate effigies from the Appalachian Mountains, marine shells from the Gulf Coast, obsidian blades from the Rocky Mountains, and even grizzly bear teeth from the far west. The Hopewell weren't just digging in their backyard. They were plugged into an enormous trade web stretching across much of North America. You picture the scene. A riverbank alive with canoes carved from hollowed logs, men unloading bundles wrapped in hide, women sorting gleaming ornaments in the glow of firelight. These items weren't just commodities, they were sacred objects. Copper hammered into breastplates and ear spools, mica cut into the shapes of birds, obsidian flaked into impossibly sharp knives. To hold one was to hold the breath of another world. You crouch and run your fingers across the grass, imagining the glint of obsidian there. It is volcanic glass, jet black, reflective, impossibly sharp. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some Hopewell obsidian has been traced by modern geochemical analysis all the way to Yellowstone. That means stones once born in fiery eruptions were carried by human hands over 1,500 miles to rest inside an Ohio mound. You laugh quietly. Talk about an overachieving souvenir. Imagine walking home from Yellowstone with a pocket full of rocks and explaining to your friends, "Don't worry, I'll build a whole mound for it." But then the humor softens, replaced by awe. You realize that these objects are not random trinkets. They represent threads in a web of connection. The Hopewell, without wheels, without horses, managed to weave trade routes that rival medieval caravans. Historians still argue whether these routes were permanent highways of exchange or intermittent pilgrimages tied to ceremonies. Were the goods primarily prestige items exchanged between leaders, or sacred offerings intended to be buried almost as soon as they arrived? You walk further and see, in imagination, a mound being opened for burial. Inside, alongside the body of someone important, are hundreds of items: pipes carved into animals, copper plates polished to mirror brightness, strings of shell beads. The grave becomes a museum of connections, a symbolic map of the world as the Hopewell knew it. The silence presses around you, but your mind is busy. You think of the skill required to carve delicate effigy pipes from stone, some shaped like owls, bears, or human heads. You picture a craftsman hunched over by firelight, chipping, smoothing, polishing, until the pipe is ready for ceremony. These were not tools of casual smoking. They were vessels of transformation, linking breath to spirit, smoke to sky. A breeze stirs, and for a moment you imagine it carries voices, chants rising during a great gathering. Archaeologists believe that these trade goods weren't just for burial. They also served as central props in elaborate rituals. You see the flicker of copper in torchlight, hear rattles shaking, smell roasting food. Hundreds gather, maybe from distant valleys, drawn by the promise of ceremony and exchange. And here's a second light joke for the night. Picture being the one guy who traveled weeks to bring obsidian, only to discover someone else showed up with copper. Talk about awkward gift duplication. "Oh, you brought volcanic glass? I also brought volcanic glass. Should we return one?" You move along the edge of a wide embankment, and the stars above seem sharper now. The Hopewell didn't have writing, but they wrote with soil and trade, creating stories in earthworks and artifacts. Every item, every mound, every alignment is a sentence in a language we're still trying to translate. Still, uncertainty lingers. Historians still argue whether the Hopewell were unified by a shared belief system or whether each community interpreted these goods differently. Was there a central vision guiding it all, or was the pattern simply the result of countless local traditions woven together by trade? You pause near a low ridge, and the ground feels warm beneath your hand, as though the objects buried here still radiate memory. You smile faintly at another thought. If Hopewell people had Instagram, Their feed would have been filled with travel shots and artifact unboxings. Check out my new copper plate. No filter. The laughter fades into silence, replaced by reverence. You realize you're standing at the heart of a network that spanned a continent. The Hopewell didn't just build with soil, they built with connection, with the shimmer of faraway places brought close through ritual. The trail beckons onward. Ahead, a shape looms strange and coiled, not a square or a circle, but something more alive. Something that writhes across the land like a living myth. The serpent waits, carved into earth. The ground rises and falls in quiet waves until, suddenly, it coils. At first, you think your eyes are playing tricks in the dim light, but as the moon shifts, the pattern reveals itself. A serpent, long and winding, sculpted directly into the earth. You stand still, breath caught in your chest. This is no ordinary mound. It is Serpent Mound, one of the most enigmatic creations of the ancient world. The mainstream historical fact is simple. Serpent Mound, located in present-day Ohio, stretches over 1,300 feet in length, its sinuous body ending in a spiral tail, its open mouth seemingly swallowing, or perhaps offering, an egg-shaped mound. Archaeologists agree it is among the most impressive effigy mounds in North America. But when it was built, and by whom, remains a matter of debate. Some evidence ties it to the Adena culture around 300 BCE, others to the later Fort Ancient culture near 1070 CE. The serpent resists easy answers, coiling itself in mystery. You step closer, tracing the curves with your eyes. The ridges are not high, only a few feet, but the length of it overwhelms you. You imagine what it must have felt like to stand here centuries ago, watching the full moon rise over the serpent's coils. Archaeologists note that the mound seems to align with solstices and lunar events, suggesting a celestial connection. Historians still argue whether the serpent was meant to embody the sky's rhythms, a guardian of the underworld, or both. A quirky tidbit flits into your mind. In the 19th century, when Serpent Mound was first mapped, some Victorian enthusiasts insisted it proved that ancient Celts, or even Norse explorers, had visited America, bringing their dragon myths with them. It's the kind of theory that sounds like it belongs in a pub conversation after 3 mugs of ale. In reality, the serpent is firmly native in origin, but you can't deny, it does look ready to slither into a saga. The silence deepens as you follow the serpent's curve. Its body twists with precision, each bend deliberate. Some scholars believe the spiral tail mirrors celestial cycles, perhaps the winding path of the moon over 18.6 years. You tilt your head back, watching the pale orb drift through the clouds. Did the builders know so much of the sky that they encoded it here, in grass and soil? You shiver, not from cold, but from the sense of intelligence folded into silence. You crouch near the serpent's mouth, staring at the egg-shaped mound it cradles. Was it devouring, birthing, offering? The ambiguity is unsettling, like a riddle whispered without an answer. Historians still argue whether this egg represents the sun, the moon, the world itself, or even a cosmic rebirth. You smirk faintly. If only the builders had left a plaque. Welcome to Serpent Mound, symbolism, all of the above. A breeze ripples through the grass, and you picture ceremonies held here. Torches lining the serpent's spine, drums pulsing like the heartbeat of the earth, chants rising into the dark. people gathering from far and wide, standing in awe as the serpent glowed in firelight. Perhaps they believed the effigy was alive, that by feeding it offerings, they maintained balance between the living world and the unseen realms. You step along its length, the ground firm beneath you. The serpent feels alive, coiling under your feet, as though it might rise at any moment and shake off its grassy cloak. You pause and grin. Third light joke of the night. If it did rise, you'd hope it had the courtesy to give you a ride home instead of chasing you down. The air thickens with imagination. You see hunters laying down copper ornaments, farmers bringing baskets of maize, shamans smoking effigy pipes and whispering to the serpent. Here, the land itself became story, not carved in stone, not painted on walls, but written in earth so large only sky spirits could read it fully. The debates continue, even now. Was Serpent Mound built in one moment of vision, or was it reshaped by generations, each adding to a legacy? Historians still argue whether its meaning lies in astronomy, mythology, fertility, or all combined. The truth may be that it was never meant to be explained, only experienced. You stand at the spiral tail, looking back along the winding body. In the moonlight, the serpent glows pale, like a sleeping titan stretched across the land. You feel both small and included, as though you too are a scale on its back, part of a larger pattern. And then the trail beckons you forward again, carrying you away from the serpent's coils. Ahead, the land opens into villages, fields, and daily life. The builders were not only dreamers of cosmic serpents, they were farmers, parents, and neighbors. Their lives pulsed with rhythms more ordinary, but no less meaningful. You leave the serpent's silent coils behind and step into the soft glow of dawn. The horizon lightens, brushing the fields in pale silver, and suddenly the land feels lived in again. Smoke rises faintly from distant fire pits. You hear the imagined chatter of voices, the thud of wooden pestles grinding maize, the splash of oars against a riverbank. You've walked out of ceremonial earthworks and into daily life, villages where people farm, feast, and raise children beside the mounds. The mainstream historical fact is clear. By around 500 CE, the descendants of mound-building cultures were firmly agricultural, cultivating maize, beans, and squash. Villages sprouted near rivers and fertile floodplains. Homes, often circular huts built from wooden posts and daub, clustered in small communities. The mounds that once rose purely as sacred centers now stood near fields where life unfolded in steady rhythm. You wander through one such village in your imagination. A woman bends over a patch of squash, her hands dark with soil. Children chase each other in the grass, their laughter punctuated by the occasional scolding from an elder. Men return from the hunt, with deer strung between them. It feels ordinary, yet the presence of nearby earthworks infuses it all with weight. Here, the sacred and the mundane are neighbors. Historians still argue whether these villages were permanently settled or seasonal, shifting as fields wore out and resources changed. Some evidence suggests people moved fluidly between farming, hunting, and trading, never locked into a single way of life. Whatever the pattern, the mound was always there, a quiet reminder that daily bread and cosmic meaning were entwined. You pause by a fire pit. A family sits together, roasting fish caught from the river. One of them tells a story, his voice rising and falling like the crackle of flames. Perhaps he speaks of ancestors buried in nearby mounds, or of spirits who watch over the cornfields. Food, story, ritual, it all mingles here. And here's a quirky tidbit to lighten the scene. Archaeologists have discovered that ancient villagers sometimes tossed broken pipes, pots, and ornaments into trash pits that later became archaeological gold mines. Imagine some future researcher piecing together your civilization from your leftover takeout boxes and busted smartphones. You grin. History's garbage is always someone else's treasure. You stroll further into the village. Dogs bark at your approach, tails wagging in the dusty morning light. A boy waves a carved wooden rattle, shaking it with joy. You sense that community wasn't just about survival. It was about belonging. Every field planted, every meal shared, every mound built reinforced bonds between people who depended on one another. And yet, tension always lurked beneath. Farming meant more mouths could be fed, but it also tied families to land, inviting disputes. Did one group claim the mound as theirs? Did others gather only as guests? Historians still argue whether the growing scale of agriculture and ritual gatherings pushed villages into hierarchies, planting seeds of inequality that would later blossom into chiefdoms. The air is warm now, scented with maize roasting on an open fire. You watch a woman weaving mats from reeds, her fingers moving quickly, skill learned through repetition. Beside her, a child naps with a puppy curled at his side. The scene is so tender you almost forget the weight of time pressing around you. Then a drumbeat starts in the distance, soft, slow, steady. The people gather, carrying bowls of food, rattles, and pipes. They move toward the mound. You follow, and suddenly the village's ordinary rhythm turns ceremonial. Farmers, hunters, children, all merge into something larger. A feast begins at the mound's base. Food is offered not just to mouths, but to memory. Smoke rises, carrying prayers to the sky. You smile faintly at the thought. If these villagers had potlucks, someone probably always showed up with the same dish. Oh, look, it's maize stew again. How original. But no one minded. Sharing food was sharing life. As the gathering swells, you sense the duality of existence here. By day, planting, cooking, weaving, raising children. By night, rituals under moonlight, earthworks glowing with fire. The village is not split between sacred and ordinary. The two are threads of one fabric. The sun climbs higher, warming your face. You glance back toward the fields, where rows of maize ripple gently. Beyond them, the mound still rises, quiet, enduring. And further still, beyond the horizon, you sense another transformation waiting. The rise of people who will take these mounds to new heights, stacking earth into towering platforms, birthing the Mississippian world. The sun climbs higher as you leave the small village behind, its fires fading into smoke at the horizon. The path widens into a plain that feels almost endless, and there, rising above the grass, are mounds unlike anything you've seen before. These are not gentle domes or winding effigies. They are massive, flat-topped platforms, terraced with deliberate precision. The Mississippian world has begun to rise, and with it, the age of cities built from earth. The mainstream historical fact is striking. Beginning around 800 CE, societies along the Mississippi River Valley developed large, complex centers with flat-topped mounds serving as foundations for temples, elite residences, and council houses. This was the Mississippian culture, and it flourished for centuries, creating urban hubs like Cahokia in present-day Illinois, Etowah in Georgia, and Moundville in Alabama. The scale was staggering. Some sites boasted dozens of mounds arranged around vast plazas, with populations in the tens of thousands. You walk toward one now, the ground sloping gently before steepening at the mound's base. It towers above you, a platform of soil rising as high as a 10-story building. At its summit, you imagine a wooden structure, perhaps a temple with painted walls, perhaps the home of a chief, its roof catching the sunlight. Below, people gather in the plaza, farmers bringing maize, artisans displaying shell beads, leaders preparing for ceremonies. The flat tops tell you something new is happening. These aren't just burial places or sacred effigies. They are stages for authority, for spectacle, for power. The Mississippians were not only farming and feasting, they were governing, organizing, ruling. Historians still argue whether these centers were true states with centralized governments, or whether they were loose chiefdoms bound by ritual and kinship. What's certain is that hierarchy had arrived, and it was written in soil. A quirky tidbit bubbles up. Some Mississippian mounds were built so quickly that workers shoveled earth day and night, forming massive platforms within astonishingly short periods. Imagine the community meeting. "Hey, everyone, let's move tons of dirt with baskets. We'll get it done in a few months." And somehow they did. You laugh quietly. Today, most of us groan about moving a couch across the room. You step into the plaza, feeling its vastness stretch around you. Ceremonies unfold in your imagination, dancers with painted bodies moving in circles, drums pounding, chants rising, smoke curling into the sky. The mound looms overhead, its summit both elevated stage and sacred divide. The people look up, and in doing so, they acknowledge the order of things. Those above command, those below follow. You wander among the houses that ring the plaza, rectangular now, built with wooden posts and thatched roofs. Families cook maize gruel, trade pottery, care for children. The hum of daily life mixes with the gravity of ritual. Community is everywhere, but so is hierarchy. You sense the tension. A farmer may plant the same maize as his neighbor, but the chief's house rests above them all, both physically and symbolically. Still, these places were not grim citadels. Archaeologists have found evidence of feasts, games, and festivals. Imagine thousands gathering in a plaza, watching games of chunky, players rolling stone discs across the ground, while others hurled spears, trying to land closest to the mark. It was sport, but also a ritual of chance and fate. You smile faintly. If ESPN had existed, chunky tournaments would have filled prime time. The scale astonishes you. Cahokia, the largest Mississippian city, covered 6 square miles and housed perhaps 20,000 people, at its peak around 1100 CE, larger than London at the same time. Its central mound, called Monk's Mound, still looms today, the largest earthwork in the Americas. Historians still argue whether Cahokia was the capital of a sprawling polity or one jewel among many independent centers. Either way, you realize, you are no longer in a quiet village world. You're standing in a city that hums with energy. The plaza quiets in your imagination, and you look back at the mound. Its shape is sharp, deliberate, commanding. The earth itself has become architecture. You think, with a grin, that Mississippian builders must have invented the first skyscrapers, just made of dirt, with a killer view of the cornfields. But the humor fades quickly into reverence. These mounds carried the weight of belief, politics, and community. They were seats of ritual and power, where decisions shaped lives and ceremonies, bound people to gods and ancestors. Each mound was more than soil. It was a heartbeat of a culture. The air feels charged as you step onward. Ahead lies Cahokia itself, the greatest of all Mississippian centers, where earth and sky meet in monumental form. The path draws you toward its great plaza, where Monk's Mound waits like a sleeping titan of soil. The ground beneath your feet flattens into an open expanse so wide it seems to swallow the horizon. You pause, breath slowing, as the immensity of it sinks in. This is not a clearing, not a meadow, but a plaza, an engineered space carved into the land itself. Before you looms Monk's Mound, a colossal platform of earth rising 100 feet high, its tiers stacked like the steps of a giant staircase. You've arrived at Cahokia, the beating heart of the Mississippian world. The mainstream historical fact is undeniable. At its height around 1050 to 1200 CE, Cahokia sprawled over 6 square miles, with a population somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 people, larger than medieval London at the same time. More than 100 mounds dotted the city, with Monk's Mound as the centerpiece. Standing here, you realize you are walking into a metropolis of soil, power, and ritual. You take a slow step across the great plaza. The surface feels level, but you know it was once carefully prepared, smoothed and filled to create a gathering space for thousands. Imagine the noise. Drums thundering, chants rising, traders calling out their wares. The plaza could hold enormous festivals, where maize flowed like treasure and games of chunky drew crowds into fevered cheers. Your eyes climb Monk's Mound, its slopes sharp against the sky. On its summit once stood a massive wooden building, likely the residence or temple of Cahokia's paramount chief. From there, leaders could survey the entire city, watching smoke rise from thousands of homes and fields of maize stretching into the distance. Authority was literally elevated. To look up at the mound was to look up at power. Historians still argue whether this ruler was seen as a god-king, a high priest, or simply a chief whose charisma bound the city together. Whatever the truth, his presence dominated both earth and imagination. You imagine climbing its slopes, basket of soil in your hands, part of a workforce that labored ceaselessly to build this titan. Archaeologists estimate that Monk's Mound contains over 20 million cubic feet of earth, hauled basket by basket, shoveled by thousands of hands. You pause, shake your head, and mutter, "Moving a couch is one thing, but moving 20 million cubic feet of dirt, that deserves its own reality show." At the mound's base, the plaza bustles in your mind's eye. Traders arrive with copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf Coast, and chert blades from nearby quarries. Families spread blankets and share food, while children chase each other around the edges of the crowd. In one corner, chunky players roll stone discs, their spears arcing through the air. The plaza is alive, a heart pumping life into every corner of the city. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Near Cahokia, archaeologists uncovered rows of large wooden posts arranged in a circle, now called woodhenge. These posts appear to have been aligned with solstices and equinoxes, functioning as a massive calendar. Imagine the crowds gathering at dawn, watching the sun rise precisely between the posts, signaling planting or ritual. You grin faintly. Ancient Cahokians basically built a giant wooden version of your wall calendar. No sticky notes required. You step back and look at the plaza's immensity. The sheer number of people here must have been overwhelming. Smoke rising from cooking fires, priests chanting at the mound's base, the hum of thousands of conversations blending into one low roar. For people arriving from small villages, Cahokia must have felt like stepping into another world, one where the sacred and political merged into something dazzling and intimidating. And yet, questions linger. Historians still argue whether Cahokia was a tightly centralized state or a loose confederation bound by ritual. Was Monk's Mound the seat of absolute authority, or simply a symbol that unified many communities? The debates remain as vast as the plaza itself. You linger at the center, gazing upward. The mound casts a long shadow across the plaza, stretching like a reminder that power always overshadows the many. Still, you sense that the people here weren't just ruled. They were participants in something larger. Every festival, every ceremony, every shared moment in this space made Cahokia not just a city of earth, but a city of memory. You smile faintly at the thought. If Cahokia had Yelp reviews, the plaza would have been 5 stars for atmosphere, 3 stars for crowd control. Still, people kept coming. The pull of this place was irresistible. As the sun dips lower in your imagination, shadows lengthen across the plaza. You sense that beyond spectacle lies something deeper. The rituals of rulers, the ceremonies that blended belief with power. The mounds are no longer just stages, they are thrones, and you're about to witness what unfolded upon them. The shadow of Monk's Mound stretches long across the plaza as you drift closer, drawn to the summit where rituals and rulership once merged into a single display. The air feels charged, as if the ground itself holds echoes of chants and footsteps. You climb in your mind's eye, one earthen terrace at a time, until you reach the flat crown. From here, the entire city unfurls. The maze of houses, the fields of maize, the smoke rising from hearths, and the countless smaller mounds dotting the horizon. At the center of it all stands the great wooden building, painted and imposing, where leaders carried both authority and sacred duty. The mainstream historical fact is clear. Mississippian leaders combined political and religious roles, often seen as intermediaries between people and the divine. Their power rested not only on maize harvests and trade, but also on the spectacle of ritual. From the top of these platform mounds, chiefs oversaw ceremonies that blended governance with belief, turning political authority into sacred theater. You imagine the scene. Drums thrum like heartbeats, echoing through the plaza. Runners bring offerings of food, copper, and shells. Priests paint their faces with pigments of red and black, the colors of life and death. A chief emerges, adorned with shell beads, copper plates, and feathered regalia that shimmer in the sun. Thousands below lift their eyes. For a moment, power is not just an idea. It is embodied, walking, breathing, standing high above. Historians still argue whether these leaders were absolute monarchs, or whether councils and kinship ties restrained their rule. Some evidence suggests councils of elders or lineage heads helped guide decisions. Yet in ritual, there was no question. The mound placed the leader above all. To look up was to recognize hierarchy, to acknowledge order written into the landscape itself. You glance toward a smaller mound nearby, where a different ritual unfolds. Fires blaze, dancers move in circles, their bodies painted, rattles shaking in rhythm. Offerings are cast into the flames, maize, ornaments, perhaps even animals, symbols returned to the spirits. The people below feast, their bowls filled with food drawn from fields irrigated and organized by communal effort. Daily life and cosmic duty intertwine seamlessly. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. At Cahokia, archaeologists discovered evidence of massive feasting events, including pits filled with tens of thousands of deer bones. Imagine the logistical nightmare of catering that party. How many guests? Oh, about 5,000. Better roast another deer just in case. You chuckle softly. Even in antiquity, feeding a crowd was half the battle of leadership. The rituals grow louder in your imagination. Priests lift effigy pipes, exhaling smoke that curls skyward, carrying prayers to unseen realms. The crowd sways in rhythm, caught in the gravity of ceremony. Children gape in awe, elders murmur blessings, warriors pound drums. Every movement reinforces the structure. Those above command the ritual. Those below are bound by it. And yet, questions linger. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies were primarily agricultural, meant to ensure fertile harvests, or cosmological, reenacting myths of creation and balance. Perhaps both. The Mississippian cosmos was layered: earth, sky, underworld. Every mound, every ritual, every offering tied the people into that cosmic order. You step closer to the edge of the mound, looking down at the plaza thronged with humanity. The distance makes them seem small, but their voices rise as one, filling the air with sound that vibrates in your chest. Authority here was not enforced only with force, but with spectacle, convincing the people they were part of something larger, divine. And then a lighter thought slips in. If there had been admission tickets, Cahokia's ceremonies would have sold out faster than modern music festivals. Sorry, folks, the mountaintop seats are already taken. You grin, imagining scalpers hawking shell beads as VIP passes. The laughter fades into stillness again. You look back at the wooden building, painted bright against the sky. It is both house and temple, throne and altar. Inside, leaders may have conferred with priests, received emissaries, and planned ceremonies. Outside, their presence alone bound thousands into belief. The sun begins to dip, shadows stretching long across the plaza. The drums slow, the chants soften, and the fires die down. People drift back to their homes, their bellies full, their spirits bound anew to the order of the world. You remain high on the mound, feeling the aftershocks of ritual settle like dust on the air. The night deepens, and silence returns. But not all is serene. Beneath the grandeur, whispers stir, hints of rituals that unsettle, sacrifices that trouble even as they fascinate. The ceremonies of power were not always feasts and dances. Some carried a darker weight, and you're about to step closer to those shadows. The fires have burned low, leaving the plaza wrapped in flickering embers and long shadows. You descend from the mound slowly, each step heavy with a new awareness. Not all rituals here ended in feasting and song. Some carried a darker rhythm, one whispered in traces found by archaeologists and in stories passed down through generations. You pause at the base of a smaller mound, and the night air seems to hold its breath. The mainstream historical fact is clear. At Cahokia and other Mississippian centers, archaeologists have uncovered mass burials that suggest ritual sacrifice. One of the most famous is Mound 72 at Cahokia, where over 250 skeletons were discovered, including young women laid out in neat rows alongside high-status individuals adorned with exotic goods. These finds suggest rituals that bound community, power, and death together in unsettling ways. You kneel near the imagined mound, the grass cool against your skin. The image comes quietly at first, a gathering at night, torches burning, priests chanting. Drums echo like distant thunder. In the center, individuals are led forward, not as victims in the way we might think, but as participants in a belief system where death itself was woven into cosmic order. For the Mississippians, sacrifice was not cruelty for cruelty's sake, but an offering, a way of feeding the universe. Still, you shiver. The evidence is unmistakable, but interpretation is slippery. Historians still argue whether these burials were acts of voluntary devotion, forced offerings, or political displays of dominance. Were they solemn gifts to the gods of corn and sky, or chilling reminders of rulers' power? The silence of the soil refuses to clarify. A quirky tidbit offers a moment of uneasy levity. When early excavators first opened Mound 72 in the 1960s, they initially believed one burial pit held a giant Birdman sculpture. Later, with better analysis, it turned out to be carefully arranged bodies forming a shape. The mistake was grim, yes, but also oddly human, like squinting at clouds and seeing dragons where there are only drifting forms. You move closer, imagining the community gathered. For every drumbeat, hundreds of eyes watched, some in awe, others in fear, all bound by ritual. The chief, high on the platform mound, would oversee, his authority not just proclaimed but enacted through the ultimate offering. Smoke rises, mingling with the cries of the living and the silence of the newly departed. And yet, there's an odd thought you can't resist. Picture the one villager who grumbled, "Couldn't we just sacrifice a really big pumpkin instead?" A nervous smile flickers across your face. Even in heavy moments, humor sneaks in. The truth is complicated. Sacrifice may have cemented alliances, consecrated new constructions, or honored ancestors. It may have terrified enemies, or even reassured farmers that the corn would grow again. Every culture finds its way to balance life and death. And here, it was through spectacle, etched into memory. You lean against the grassy mound, feeling its slope firm against your back. It is unsettling to know these places once echoed with cries and chants, but it is also grounding. The people here lived by rhythms we can barely fathom. Farming, feasting, celebrating, and yes, sometimes offering life itself. To them, it was not horror, but meaning. And yet, the questions remain. Historians still argue whether sacrifice was central to Mississippian life or only an occasional act reserved for extraordinary events. Were the rows of young women buried in Mound 72 symbols of captured outsiders or honored attendants following a leader into the next world? The debate refuses to end. The moon hangs heavy above, casting long silver shadows across the plaza. You close your eyes and hear it all, the drums, the chants, the silence after. Then the sounds fade, replaced by the quiet hum of crickets. You open your eyes, heart steadying. The mound is still. Whatever happened here is long past, sealed into the earth. You stand and step away, leaving the whispers behind. Ahead, you sense a new turn. The greatness of these centers will not last forever. Climate, conflict, and change wait in the distance, ready to unravel the mighty cities of Earth. The night deepens as you leave the mound behind, its whispers fading into the cool air. Your path takes you toward fields that once thrived with maize, beans, and squash, but now lie quiet. The silence feels different here, less sacred, more fragile. You sense the beginning of unraveling, the slow decline of the great mound centers. The mainstream historical fact is this: by around 1300 CE, many Mississippian centers, including Cahokia, had entered decline. Populations dwindled, mounds were abandoned, and once bustling plazas fell silent. Archaeologists point to multiple causes: climate shifts during the Little Ice Age, deforestation, soil depletion, internal conflict, and perhaps political instability. No single reason explains it all. It was a convergence of pressures that eroded the foundations of Mississippian life. You walk through a ghostly village in your imagination. Homes stand half empty, smoke from hearths thinner than before. Fields show signs of strain, the soil exhausted after generations of farming. A woman bends low over maize plants that sprout weak and yellow. Children who once laughed in the plaza now sit quiet, bellies not quite full. The city that once pulsed with life begins to falter. Historians still argue whether climate was the main trigger, or whether human choices, like overharvesting timber for building and fuel, pushed the system past its limits. Some evidence points to increased flooding in the Mississippi Valley. Other studies suggest political tensions boiled over, fracturing once unified centers. Whatever the case, the mighty mounds could not shield their builders from change. You step into a plaza that once roared with drums. Now, weeds sprout in the cracks. The echoes of feasts and games are gone, replaced by the sigh of wind across open ground. You imagine people leaving in small groups, families carrying baskets, abandoning mounds that had anchored generations. The city empties not in a day, but in slow motion, like a drumbeat that fades, then stops. A quirky tidbit slips into your mind. In the 1800s, farmers plowing the remnants of Cahokia sometimes complained about how hard it was to drag plows across old mounds. They had no idea they were grinding down the ruins of what was once North America's greatest city. You grin faintly, imagine cursing your field for being too bumpy, while standing on top of history's skyscraper of dirt. But the humor can't mask the weight of loss. You picture rival factions within the city, leaders no longer commanding awe, but suspicion. Rituals that once bound the community may have sparked tension when harvests failed. Did some whisper that the gods had turned away? Did others blame leaders or enemies or outsiders? Historians still argue whether Cahokia fell to external war or internal collapse, but the air feels heavy with division. You wander into the remains of a house circle, its posts long gone, only dark stains in the soil marking where they once stood. You crouch, pressing your palm against one. Someone once cooked here, laughed here, lived here. Now it is gone. The earth remembers, but lightly. And yet, even as centers declined, not all was despair. Mississippian traditions endured in smaller towns and villages across the southeast. The great plazas emptied, but the knowledge of mound building, farming, and ritual flowed into new forms. Communities survived, even if empires of soil did not. You stand at the edge of the city, turning to look back. The mounds still rise, stubborn and silent. They watch the decline without crumbling, as if waiting for someone to return. You smile faintly at the thought. If the mounds could speak, they'd probably sigh. We worked so hard for this and now you're just leaving? The wind stirs, carrying the scent of rain. Storm clouds gather on the horizon, the sky dark with thunder. It feels fitting. The decline of Cahokia and its sister cities is not a single event, but a storm stretched across decades, a storm of hunger, conflict, and uncertainty. You step forward, away from the abandoned plaza. Ahead, you sense new footsteps approaching, strangers from across the ocean, whose arrival will collide with the remnants of these traditions. The story of the mounds is not over. It is about to be entangled with conquest, misunderstanding, and loss on an even greater scale. The storm breaks in your imagination, thunder rolling low as you step out of the empty plaza and into a new horizon. The air feels charged, but it is no longer only with the weight of old rituals. Across the sea, sails are rising, and with them comes a collision that will forever change the story of the mounds. The mainstream historical fact is this. When Europeans arrived in North America, first the Spanish in the 1500s, later the French, English, and others, they encountered the descendants of mound-building peoples. By then, the great Mississippian centers like Cahokia had already faded, but smaller mound traditions continued across the southeast. The Europeans, unfamiliar with the history, often misinterpreted what they saw. Some dismissed the mounds as natural hills. Others believed they were built by a lost race, unable or unwilling to credit indigenous peoples with such achievements. You walk with the first contact in your imagination. A Spanish expedition led by Hernando de Soto moves through the southeast in the 1540s, armored men clanking, horses stamping, eyes scanning the strange new landscape. They stumble into towns where platform mounds still stand, with wooden buildings on top. The Spaniards record meetings with chiefs who rule from these elevated houses. For the indigenous, the strangers must have seemed like spirits, tall, bearded, carrying weapons of iron. For the Spaniards, the mounds looked like echoes of distant pyramids. Historians still argue whether these first encounters were moments of awe, curiosity, or immediate hostility. The chronicles tell us of feasts and gifts, but also of battles, disease, and devastation. What is certain is that European arrival marked the beginning of enormous upheaval. Diseases like smallpox spread faster than explorers, crippling communities before direct contact was ever made. You pause by the base of a mound, imagining two groups meeting there. Villagers offering food and gifts, explorers staring in suspicion, their weapons glinting. Neither side fully understands the other. Words falter, gestures misfire. The mound, once a symbol of cosmic order, becomes a stage for confusion and mistrust. A quirky tidbit surfaces. In the 1700s, some European settlers insisted that the mounds were built by the lost tribes of Israel, or even by wandering Welsh explorers. These theories sound laughable now, but they reveal how deeply colonists resisted the idea that native peoples had created complex civilizations. You shake your head softly. It's like walking into someone's home, admiring the furniture, and then saying, "Wow, I bet the Martians decorated this place." The silence of the abandoned plazas becomes heavier. The mounds endure, but their people are scattered, reshaped by colonization. Some groups adapt, others vanish. Many are absorbed into the churn of disease and conflict. The continuity is not broken entirely, but the scale and grandeur of earlier times no longer return. You picture a Jesuit missionary standing at the edge of a mound, writing in his journal by candlelight. He marvels at the scale, but interprets it through his own lens, perhaps comparing it to the Tower of Babel or biblical ruins. The voices of the builders are silenced, replaced by interpretations that bend the truth to fit foreign worldviews. Still, the mounds refuse to vanish. Even as Europeans spread across the land, the great earthworks remain, covered in grass, mistaken for hills, plowed for farming. They sit quiet, enduring, waiting for recognition. You smile faintly at a modern irony. Centuries later, archaeologists will work tirelessly to prove that Native Americans built what European settlers once denied them. The builders knew it all along. And here's a light joke to ease the tension. Imagine a European explorer standing on Monk's Mound, squinting at the horizon and saying, "Well, this doesn't look like India." Geography was never their strong suit. The night air grows still again. You stand on the edge of this encounter, aware that everything has shifted. The mound builders' world has collided with one they could never have anticipated, and yet their earthworks remain, silent witnesses to both glory and devastation. Ahead, you sense another chapter. Farmers, scholars, and dreamers will argue over these mounds for centuries, forgetting and rediscovering them again and again. The story doesn't end here. It simply changes costume. The centuries roll forward, and the voices of explorers fade. You walk now across fields plowed flat, the horizon broken only by the faint humps of earth, half hidden under grass and crops. Farmers push their plows over these shapes, cursing the uneven ground. They do not see ancient plazas or sacred geometry, only obstacles to rows of corn. The mounds enter a long silence, forgotten by most, misinterpreted by many. The mainstream historical fact is this: by the 18th and 19th centuries, countless mounds had been destroyed by agriculture, development, and neglect. Yet curiosity persisted. Settlers and early antiquarians speculated wildly about who built them. Some claimed Vikings, others Egyptians, still others the lost tribes of Israel. Anything, it seemed, but the native peoples, whose descendants still lived nearby. You wander into a farmhouse yard, where children climb a low mound as if it were nothing more than a natural hill. Their laughter fills the air, innocent of the history beneath their feet. Later, when the farmer digs a cellar, he finds bones and copper ornaments. He shrugs, perhaps sells a few pieces, perhaps discards them. To him, it is curiosity, not revelation. Historians still argue why 19th century America clung so stubbornly to the idea that native peoples could not have built these works. Part of it was prejudice. Part of it was a desire to see the land as an empty stage, waiting for European settlement. By inventing mythical lost builders, settlers could erase indigenous achievements while still marveling at the mounds. A quirky tidbit. In 1848, the Smithsonian Institution published its very first volume, Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, meticulously mapping and describing mound sites. It was groundbreaking, but even then, debate swirled. Some readers accepted native origin, others held to fantasies of Atlanteans or ancient Hebrews with shovels. Imagine the arguments at dinner parties. Pass the salt. By the way, I think the Egyptians built Ohio. You climb one surviving mound, overgrown with weeds. From the top, you see the scars of plows cutting across the land. Whole complexes have been erased, their shapes visible now only in old surveys or aerial photography. You sigh quietly. To lose a building is one thing. To lose an entire landscape of meaning is another. Yet rediscovery begins. Archaeologists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries dig carefully, mapping burial chambers, analyzing trade goods, and finally acknowledging what native communities had always said. The mounds were theirs, built by their ancestors. The narrative begins to shift, though slowly, stubbornly. You pause, the evening breeze cooling your face. The weight of loss is heavy, but so is the persistence of memory. Even in ruin, the mounds refuse to vanish completely. They sit in the earth, half hidden but not erased, waiting for recognition. And here's a light joke for the road. Imagine future archaeologists studying our suburbs, arguing whether cul-de-sacs were ritual circles or just really inefficient traffic designs. Every age misinterprets the past in its own way. The truth is simple and profound. The mounds were always here, built by hands that shaped earth into memory. They were forgotten, twisted into myths, then slowly rediscovered. And now, in the present, you find yourself walking among them once more, their shapes quiet under the grass, their meanings still echoing. The trail leads onward. You feel the pull of the present day, where archaeologists, descendants, and visitors still debate what the mounds mean. The grass whispers underfoot. The story is not over. The grass is soft beneath your shoes as you return to the quiet of the present day. The air is still, filled with crickets, and the faint smell of earth warmed by the afternoon sun. Before you rise the mounds once more, no longer thronged by ancient crowds or foreign explorers, but standing in silence. They are green now, cloaked in grass, dotted with wildflowers. Families walk across them on weekends. Archaeologists map them with drones. Descendants visit to remember. You pause, and the stillness feels like a heartbeat slowed but not stopped. The mainstream historical fact is this. Thousands of mounds remain scattered across North America, from the Ohio River Valley to the deep south. Many have been destroyed, but others are preserved as parks, monuments, and sacred sites. They are recognized today as the achievements of native peoples, not of mythical lost races. Some, like Cahokia, are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. The acknowledgement is late, but it matters. You climb slowly up one low mound. The slope is gentle, the grass tickling your ankles. From the top, you see rolling farmland, a highway in the distance, a cluster of houses. The view is ordinary, yet the mound itself is extraordinary. It whispers of ancient plazas, of feasts and rituals, of songs long gone. You realize the mounds are not only about the past, they are also about how the present chooses to remember. Historians still argue whether we will ever fully understand the builder's intentions. Were the mounds cosmic maps, burial markers, ceremonial theaters, political stages? Perhaps they were all these things and more. The ambiguity endures, and maybe that is fitting. Mystery, after all, has its own power. You imagine the voices of children running past, their laughter bright. A dog barks. A couple sits on a blanket, pointing at clouds. Life continues around the mounds, ordinary and unassuming. The builders are gone, but the shapes they left still shape the land. A quirky tidbit drifts in. At Serpent Mound today, visitors sometimes picnic right on the coils, blissfully unaware they're sitting on a 1,000-year-old effigy. You smile. History has a way of humbling us. The serpent, patient as ever, endures the sandwiches. And here, at the end of your walk, You breathe deeply. The story has carried you through centuries, from the first small burial mounds to the vast Hopewell circles, to Cahokia's towering platforms, to sacrifice, decline, encounter, forgetting, and rediscovery. Yet the mounds remain, rising gently beneath grass, echoing the memory of peoples who dreamed in earth and sky. You close your eyes. The hum of crickets fades, the air softens, and the mounds seem to exhale with you. They are not gone. They are waiting, patient, enduring, whispering beneath the grass. The night grows quieter, and your steps slow, as if the earth itself asks you to linger. The mounds rest beneath the stars, unhurried, unconcerned, holding their secrets close. You feel the stillness settle into your shoulders, soft and heavy, like a blanket drawn against the cool air. The builders are long gone, their voices vanished into the soil, but their presence remains. Each curve of earth, each raised platform, each winding effigy is a reminder that people once walked here, dreamed here, believed that their lives and deaths mattered enough to shape the land itself. There is comfort in that thought. You are not the first to seek meaning in the silence of night, and you will not be the last. The air softens around you, and your breath deepens. The weight of history eases, no longer a burden, but a quiet companion. The mounds do not demand answers. They simply ask you to notice, to listen, to rest in their company. The grass shifts in the breeze, and you imagine it as the whisper of old songs, steady and gentle, fading but never lost. As you prepare for sleep, let the image of those green shapes linger. Picture them bathed in moonlight, surrounded by quiet fields, eternal yet fragile. Let the rhythm of the earth beneath them match the rhythm of your own breathing. The story is long, the mysteries endless. But for now, there is nothing more to do. Close your eyes. Let the silence of the mounds carry you into dreams, soft and deep, like earth enfolding you in rest. The end, sweet dreams.